Good evening, friends, and welcome to our live stream here on Wednesday evening, offered to you from Empty Cloud Monastery in New Jersey. And if you're watching this live on the video or watching this after it's been recorded, I hope that you're doing well and that your practice is progressing, that you're happy and peaceful wherever you may be. And I see some people slowly gathering in, collecting into the live stream. So we'll just wait a few minutes before we get started. But for the sutta here, we will be looking at the Mahācattārīsakasutta. So another discourse of the Buddha. We'll be continuing our study of the discourses of the Buddha. And this is Majjhima Nikāya 117. So in the middle length sayings or the middle length discourses of the Buddha, you have teachings which are, of no surprise, of middle length. And this is the 117th of those discourses. And the meaning of Mahācattārīsaka is the Great 40. So we'll get to, if we end up getting to that part of the sutta, then you will find out why is it called the Great 40. And until then, you'll have to continue listening to the live stream. So no jumping ahead. Okay, so I see some people giving greetings. So greetings to Brian and Sean joining in, as well as to Bhumika. Hope that you're all doing well. And so at this time, I will render homage to the Buddha, our original teacher, and the reason why we have the ability to gather, to reflect, to practice. And so after rendering homage to the Buddha, then we can go ahead and begin the live session this evening. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Sanghaṃ Saranam Gacchāmi. Okay, so we can maybe just take a minute, just take a few breaths to kind of settle in. I know that maybe you've had a day at work or you've had a busy day, even not working, and we can just take a few minutes just to notice our bodies, notice our minds, so that we can kind of notice where our minds are. And it might be helpful if you close your eyes and take a deep breath. Maybe get a sense if there's any tension in the body. And just allow your mind to come back to being aware that you're experiencing sights and sounds and so on at this time. Allowing any momentum in your mind to slowly settle down into the present moment. And see if you can develop a sense of contentment, a sense of just happy to be here and happy to have this opportunity. Cooling down the rushing forward in the mind. And just noticing what's present. And if it's natural for you, you can notice your breath. Or you might just stay with being in the present moment, feeling the body, noticing the states of your mind. Whatever type of meditation and type of practice is helpful for you to establish mindfulness. Just feel free to allow your mind to settle into that, setting aside what you've done earlier today or even further back in the past. And setting aside what you might be doing in the future, later on after this, or even further forward in the future, please allow your mind to just settle into mindfulness in the present, with a sense of ease. So I have heard. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. There, the Buddha addressed the mendicants. Mendicants, Venerable Sir, they replied. The Buddha said this. Mendicants, I will teach you noble right immersion with its vital conditions and its prerequisites. Listen and apply your mind well. I will speak. Yes, sir, they replied. The Buddha said this. And what is noble right immersion, or noble right samadhi, with its vital conditions and its prerequisites? They are right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, and right mindfulness. Unification of mind with these 7 factors as prerequisites is what is called noble right samadhi, with its vital conditions and also with its prerequisites. So we can pause here. So what the Buddha is doing is he's started the sutta, of course, he's going to be explaining to the monks what is Samma Samadhi, right? And he's calling it also, he's explaining what is noble right samadhi, right? And so for those of you who are familiar with the Noble Eightfold Path, then you might know that factor, at least the name of it, right? Samma Samadhi, right immersion or right unification of mind. And here the Buddha is starting the sutta by explaining that he's going to be detailing what exactly is that. And specifically, he says, with its vital conditions and its prerequisites. So what are those supporting conditions and the prerequisites, the conditions and factors, the different attributes of the path, attributes of your practice, which are supports and necessary conditions for there to come about right samadhi, noble right samadhi, meaning right samadhi as a factor of the path. And so this is what the Buddha is beginning the sutta with, right? He's going to explain that. And he defines noble right samadhi with its vital conditions and prerequisites. He says, it is unification of mind with right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, and right mindfulness as prerequisite conditions. So this is what he's calling noble right samadhi with vital conditions, or with its necessary conditions and with its prerequisites. And so this is important because here the Buddha is explaining what is Samma Samadhi, right? And it's important to keep in mind that the word samadhi, so the term samadhi, which here the Buddha is defining it, right? He's saying it's quote unquote unification of mind. So samadhi is defined as unification of mind. That's essentially just a synonym of the word samadhi in Pali. And so maybe we can first talk about what is the word samadhi itself, right? The word samadhi itself literally can be derived as meaning gathering together, unifying, as well as even starting a fire, right? So it actually has this double sense in Pali, which is common for related terms. So also the term, you might have heard the term jhana, right? So jhana, or also in Chinese called chan, right? And in Thai, I believe it's also called that. And so jhana is a word which also refers to samadhi. It's a synonym of the term samadhi. And jhana, the verb for that in Pali is jayati. Jayati literally means, to meditate, or like to practice jhana, to do jhana, but it also means to burn, for fire to be kind of burning. So it has that sense of light and the sense of a flame illuminating things. And similarly, samadhi can mean to collect things together, to gather things together, to hold things in a unity. But it can also mean when someone kindles a fire, because when you kindle a fire, you collect together the kindling and the wood, and you unify it with the fire, right? So in order to start a fire, you kind of put all these conditions together, and when they all meet in a unity, a fire starts, or a fire is sparked. And a fire has to function as one whole unit, right? It has to be a kind of a cohesive unit working together. You can't have the sticks over here and the flame over there, right? It's all one thing. And so samadhi, the verb samadhyati, to bring together, to unify, as well as to start a fire, has this parallel imagery with the verb jayati, meaning to practice, also for someone to practice samadhi or for a fire to be burning. And so samadhi in and of itself, the term is not necessarily Buddhist, right? So samadhi refers, as the Buddha says here, to unification of mind. And samadhi refers to a very deep, generally very deep, unified state where the mind's energies, the mind's flowing outward towards the various different sense objects and sense impressions, its involvement with different thoughts and emotions, moods and preoccupations. Samadhi is referring to a state wherein all of those energies are gathered together into one whole. So just like a fire burning, it all works together for the fire to be burning consistently, stably, as one unit, right? So if the mind is unified such that it is totally engrossed, totally immersed within itself, like if you collected everything together and you put it together and everyone is working in harmony together as one team with no sense of separation, then you could say that that group has been samadhied, right? It's been brought together into a harmony, into a unity, into a whole. So samadhi is if you can make your entire being, your entire person, whole, one unity. So not part of you wanting this and part of you doing that, not part of your mind over here and the other over there, and not the mind jumping from different objects and preoccupations, but rather if your mind is unified such that you have a singleness of purpose, a singleness of experience, a singleness of intention, and a singleness of preoccupation. So everything brought together into a unity, into a oneness. That's what the Buddha and other people in India would call samadhi. Now, in modern times, people who, maybe if you're from India, you might know the term samadhi to mean something slightly different. But if you know if you practice yoga, for example, you might have also heard the term samadhi referring to deep meditation. Right? And so samadhi in and of itself is a deep, pure state of consciousness, a state of purified, unified consciousness. And it's not normal. Most people won't experience it. And you could say that people might experience some kind of samadhi, but like very deep, real, like total samadhi is very rare. So most people will never experience that, including many meditators. I don't know if I could say most meditators, but many meditators won't really experience probably samadhi unless they're really dedicated to meditation. But just doing like 5 minutes of meditation in the morning and in the evening, that's not really going to be enough, right? So samadhi is when your whole mind gets just totally engrossed in itself and merges with itself and so on. And so, but here the Buddha is defining noble right samadhi, right? So samma samadhi. And that's the key feature here. That's what this sutta will be kind of talking about and revolving around with this introductory theme, is what is samma samadhi, right? What is right samadhi? What is the correct one? Samma, right, meaning part of the Noble Eightfold Path. What is the Noble Eightfold Path, right? So I'll give you a minute to reflect. What is the Noble Eightfold Path? The Noble Eightfold Path is the Buddha's explanation of the way which leads to the end of suffering, right? So if in the Buddha's explanation of the Four Noble Truths, right, when the Buddha rolled forth the wheel of Dhamma, when he declared the teaching that he had realized personally himself, when he declared it to the world, he broke it down traditionally in terms of the Four Noble Truths, right? Suffering, or the problem that we're facing, the cause of suffering, the cause of the problem, the cessation of suffering, or the possibility of ending the problem, the possibility of curing the problem, and the way which leads to the cessation of suffering, the medicine that can be applied, the practice that can be undergone, that will lead to the resolving of the problem, that will lead to the curing of the sickness, that will lead to removing the suffering, right? So the Noble Eightfold Path is the Buddha's path of practice, right? It's the Buddhist practice. So if you say, what does Buddhism teach that one should practice? What does the Buddha say that one should do, right? Then you could answer the Noble Eightfold Path. Buddhism teaches that one should follow, one should develop and cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path. Why is it called the Noble Eightfold Path? Because it's a path, it's a series of, it's a practice which is made of 8 factors, right? So eightfold means 8 factors. It has 8 components to it. And why is it called noble? Because it's the teaching of the noble ones, right? Of the Buddha and of the enlightened, those people who are enlightened. So it's that which the enlightened ones cultivate. It's the path which the enlightened ones follow. So if you follow the yellow brick road to get to Oz, then you will be following the path of those who have gotten to the city of Oz. If you follow the Noble Eightfold Path, you'll be following the road which leads to Nibbana, the road which the noble ones have traversed, right? So maybe sometimes you'll see footprints in a path if you're walking through the woods, or you'll see a little trail, kind of indications of animals which have been around there, different tracks. And so if you follow the Noble Eightfold Path, you'll see the tracks of the Buddha, you'll see the tracks of the great Arahants, you'll see the tracks of the noble ones, and eventually you will be one of those noble ones. So the Noble Eightfold Path is that path which leads you to Nibbana, which leads you to the end of suffering, the end of craving, and thereby the end of suffering from then onward. So following from that, I should say. So the Noble Eightfold Path, and so it's called noble because it's ennobling and it's what the noble ones see. And so it's defined in terms of 8 pieces, 8 factors, all of which the Buddha says are samma. Samma meaning right. Samma meaning correct. Samma meaning proper, right? So complete. So 8 factors which are right. And this means that it's not just any particular, say, samadhi, but it has to be samma samadhi, right? The right samadhi. Samadhi which leads to nibbana. So samma, right, correct. What makes a factor of the path correct? What makes it correct is, does it lead you to become a noble one? Does it lead you to nibbana? So the Buddha would sometimes reflect, and he would reflect on maybe a particular quality or a particular thought, a particular practice, and he would ask himself, he would evaluate with his discernment, does this practice lead to peace? Does it lead to higher knowledge? Does it lead to awakening? Does it lead to the extinguishment of suffering? The extinguishment of the causes of suffering? So he would reflect like that, right? And he would see, okay, does this lead to these goals? Does it lead towards nibbana or does it not? And so then he would cultivate those practices which do lead to nibbana. And he would discard and train himself to disengage with those practices which led him away from nibbana. So for example, right, he became a renunciant. He became basically a monk, what we would consider in English, we call them like a monk. So he became a renunciant. He renounced indulging in sensual pleasures. And he said that the indulgence in sensual pleasures, the pursuit of sensual pleasures, is hino, low, gammo, vulgar, potujjaniko, the practice of common people, anaryo, ignoble, anatasangito, pointless. So he says that the practice of indulging in sensual pleasures, of pursuing, nice fancy cars and nice mortgages with beautiful houses and ice cream and food and luxury vacations and so on, that these things are actually ignoble, that they're unarriyo, they're not noble. They don't lead to the goal. They are anatasangito, not connected with the goal, not beneficial. They're pointless. They don't have a benefit in terms of the spiritual practice. So you can kind of use this as a scheme, right? So what does samma mean? What makes something noble? It's something which leads to the goal, something which leads to nibbana, right? So that's what right means in the context of the Noble Eightfold Path. And so here the Buddha is defining what is samma samadhi, what is right samadhi. And he says, reasonably, right, we could understand why he might say that. He says it's samadhi which is supported by the necessary condition and the prerequisite of all the previous 7 factors. So you develop the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh, all right. You develop those correctly, you develop those properly, you develop the other prerequisite supporting factors of the path, of the practice of your life to lead you towards nibbana. And if you use those as prerequisites and supports for unifying your mind in samadhi, then that would be called right samadhi, noble right samadhi. Okay, and it's important to keep in mind that right samadhi and wrong samadhi are both samadhi, right? So for example, we'll talk about this in a minute, but you have, for example, right speech and wrong speech, okay? Right speech and wrong speech are both forms of speech. So it's not like wrong speech is something else, right? So right speech is, for example, as we'll talk about in a minute, right speech is things like, for example, not lying, not telling intentional lies. Wrong speech would be something like lying, right? So wrong speech is a form of speech. It is real speech. It's actual speech. It's just the wrong kind. Similarly, right thought is something like thoughts of renunciation. Wrong thought is thoughts of sensuality, thoughts of indulgence in sensual pleasures. So both of them are actual thoughts, right? Wrong thought and right thought are both thought. It's just that one leads you to nibbana and one leads away from nibbana. So right samadhi and wrong samadhi are both samadhi. So sometimes people think like wrong samadhi is some kind of other state which isn't samadhi. But that wouldn't be wrong samadhi, right? That wouldn't be samadhi, which is wrong. That would be something else. So wrong samadhi is actual samadhi. It's real samadhi, which doesn't lead to nibbana. What would that mean? You can understand from what the Buddha has just defined here. It would be samadhi, which is supported by wrong thought, wrong view, wrong speech, etc. If it's not supported by the 7 previous factors of the path, if it's not supported by right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, and right mindfulness, it would be wrong samadhi. So, for example, if you are a Hindu practitioner developing samadhi so that you can unify yourself with the eternal cosmos, then when you experience samadhi, you have the view, the cosmos is eternal and you want to merge with it. You have the thoughts of merging with that. You develop your ethical conduct in accordance with that goal. You apply your mindfulness and energy in order to achieve that goal. You would develop samadhi and you attain the goal of experiencing a samadhi state, which you believe, your view is that it's union with the cosmos. That's called wrong samadhi. And out of it comes wrong knowledge, the knowledge that you are unified with the cosmos, and wrong liberation, the belief that you are liberated from whatever you're liberated from. So the Eightfold Path, it's not that you don't necessarily develop samadhi, but it's wrong samadhi if it is supported by wrong view, and then also if it's supported by other wrong factors, and if it doesn't issue in nibbana. So it's samadhi which doesn't issue in nibbana. It's not no samadhi. It is samadhi, it's just not the right one. So that's important to keep in mind because that's sort of the context for what the Buddha is defining here, right? So it is unification of mind, it's real samadhi, when it's supported by right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, and right mindfulness. That is noble right samadhi. Okay, and then the Buddha continues. In this context, right view comes first. And how does right view come first? When you understand wrong view as wrong view and right view as right view, that's your right view. So this is a really crucial part, because the Buddha is then going to elaborate on this theme of right view comes first over and over again in the sutta. So the very first factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, samadhi, right view, the Buddha says that comes first. That is the leader, that's the chief. And there are many other places in the suttas where right view is emphasized as being especially important. Because right view is basically that factor which determines if it's the right path or not, right? So if you have good ethical conduct, so like, for example, if you don't think cruel thoughts, you develop your sila, and so that you act, you don't kill beings, you don't steal, and you, etc., you don't lie, and so on. You develop good speech, good bodily conduct, good mental conduct, and you develop a nice livelihood, and you practice meditation. If you have wrong view, basically everything else is going to be, the path will be wrong. And so if you have right view, basically everything else will follow from that. And that's what the Buddha will then, he actually will say this later in the sutta, but so we'll go there when we get there. But it's important, this is what he's saying. He's saying in this context, in the context of developing the Noble Eightfold Path up to Noble Right Samadhi, the right view comes first, meaning right view is like the priority. It's the first thing that needs to be established. It's the most important thing that will lead, everything else will follow from there. Right? And I think you can understand why that might be the case. Like, if you have the view that you'll be so happy when you get to Mongolia, then you're going to be constantly thinking about getting to Mongolia. You're going to talk to the ticket and travel agency about going to Mongolia. You're going to act so that you can get to Mongolia. You're going to work and get a livelihood to earn money to go to Mongolia. You're going to apply energy and effort so that you can get there. You're going to be very mindful of the process. You're going to be constantly remembering your goal. And so if you have the wrong view, like Mongolia is where happiness lies, then everything else will follow from that. Because our views shape our choices, our views shape our thoughts, our views shape our actions, our views shape everything, right? How we see the world, how we view the world, that will shape everything else that we do. So it's very important that we evaluate, like, what are the views that we're holding to? What are the views that we believe, right? And so now we'll get to the Buddha's definition here. He says, so what is the first definition of the function of right view, he says, is how does right view come first? When you understand wrong view as wrong view and right view as right view, that's your right view. So here the Buddha is saying that right view is that view which makes the distinction between what is wrong and what is right. Remembering that what does wrong mean? Wrong means it doesn't lead you to Nibbana. It doesn't lead you to the end of suffering. Right meaning it leads you to Nibbana. It leads you to the end of suffering. So right view, he's saying, is the faculty of, if you can understand what will lead you to Nibbana and what won't. Right? And we kind of mentioned that. So if you know that, you can just imagine everything else is set. Right? If you know what is going to get you to Nibbana and what's not, you'll know how to think, you'll know how to speak, you'll know how to act, you'll know how to meditate, you'll know how to apply your mind to realize it. So right view comes first. And right view is the faculty which understands here what is wrong view and what is right view. So even applying it to the view yourself, you have to see, which views am I holding? If you have right view, you're trying to see which views will lead you to Nibbana. And this sutta should be held in the context of, it's a kind of commentary on the Noble Eightfold Path. So many of you, I hope, will be already familiar with that teaching, because it's kind of important to already have that framework in your mind when this teaching is going, because here the Buddha is commenting in more detail on that. So in this sutta, the Buddha is going to be explaining how the path is gradually developed to culminate into liberation. And maybe I'll just give a little bit of more context, stepping back a little bit, right? That the last factor of the Eightfold Path is right samadhi. And the Buddha has just defined right samadhi as samadhi supported by the previous 7 factors. So if you want to realize Nibbana, then you have to develop samadhi. You have to develop right samadhi. And the Buddha is now explaining, okay, well, how do you get there? Well, you start with right view, right? So right view is the first. So he's just explained, like, what's the last factor? And now he's going to what's the first factor, and he's going to bridge the gap between this. So how you can develop the whole path to issue Nibbana, right? So nowadays, some people, they're interested in which method should we practice to get to Nibbana? Right? Should we practice the Mahasi method? Should we practice the Ajahn Chah method? Should we practice the I won't name all the monks and bhikkhunis and bhikkhus in the world, but should we practice the method in Mahayana Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism? Should we practice the method of this teacher or that teacher? Should we practice the method from this book or that book, from this video or that video? What about this teacher? They seem to contradict themselves. Which one is right? Which is the right method? Well, what did the Buddha say? What is the right method? The Noble Eightfold Path. From the very beginning, he's explained what the method is. So it's, we should be shocked and appalled that we find it, that we're confused about like which method should we follow, right? So if the Buddha is our teacher, then the Buddha has laid it out. I would hope with all my heart that he wasn't wasting his time not teaching us the actual method, waiting for someone else to come and tell us what it really was. That would be disappointing, right? So the Buddha, if we trust the Buddha, which you basically have to, because anyone else who's claiming to be enlightened in the Buddhist tradition, they're basing that on the Buddha himself, right? So if you follow Buddhism and you say, well, my teacher says so-and-so, well, who did your teacher get it from? All the way back to, it has to go back to the Buddha. So anybody can be wrong, but the Buddha cannot be wrong if you are following the Buddha's practice, right? He's the one person who definitely has to have it right. Otherwise, the whole thing is a sham. So if we want to know what is the best method, we should go to the source, right? The person who achieved enlightenment and who is the source of the teacher. He's your teacher's teacher, right? He's your role model's role model. The Buddha is the teacher of all teachers. He is the supreme teacher. He is Sattha Deva Manusanang, teacher of gods and humans. Anuttaro Purisa Dhamma Sarati, the supreme, the unsurpassed trainer of those who can be trained. So the Buddha is an amazing teacher acting out of compassion, acting out of his wisdom and conduct. And so he gave us the method. It's called the Noble Eightfold Path. And so can we follow it? Can we cultivate it? Can we develop it? This is him explaining how you do that. How do you get to Nibbana? You develop noble right samadhi. How do you do that? By developing the previous 7 factors. Where does that start? That starts with right view. Okay, now we can continue. So right view understands wrong view as wrong view and right view as right view. And what is wrong view? Wrong view is the view that there is no meaning in giving, no meaning in sacrifice or offerings. There's no fruit or result of good and bad deeds. There's no afterlife. There's no such thing as mother and father or beings that are reborn spontaneously. And there's no ascetic or Brahmin who is rightly comported and rightly practiced, and who describes the afterlife after realizing it with their own insight. This is wrong view. So does that sound familiar? You may have heard that recently, right? So this is quite a common view. And sometimes, of course, people think that it's modern and special, right? Like, in the Buddha, everyone believed in rebirth, everyone believed in an afterlife. That was just the naive culture of India, and the Buddha was just naively following that. Well, the Buddha is saying that actually that is a view that is wrong, that people, would have held. He was aware of that possibility, right? And he's saying that that's wrong view. So the Buddha was not a uncritical thinker, right? The Buddha was critical thinker. So he evaluated his own mind very carefully. Remember, in the story of the Buddha was very, very wealthy, had a noble family, and he left it to become a homeless beggar. So I would assume that someone who does that would think twice before making that choice, right? He was educated. He was from a good family. He wasn't a poor person who was uneducated and just wanted to escape the experience of poverty, right? He was a wealthy person with an education. So he had access, he had the choice, and he decided to go forth. So that already is requiring a good degree of reflection and contemplation, right? Then he became very advanced in meditation, one of the top meditation teachers of probably the entire world. If you look at the history of the world, look at the ancient world, look at the text, look at the history, the Buddha's first teacher that he speaks of, who attained what's called the dimension of nothingness, if you look in the history of the world, it seems that probably outside of India, I don't know if anyone was ever had attained that at that time. In our history, it doesn't seem like anyone had attained that. That was probably the most advanced one of the most advanced meditation states or teachers of the entire world, up to that point of all human history, literally. And the Buddha attained it. And the Buddha was invited to become a teacher of that community. So the Buddha was an accomplished meditation teacher who probably achieved one of the most advanced meditation states any human had ever achieved in the history of our modern humanity. With respect, with accomplishments, right? And he left that behind because he realized that wasn't the ultimate goal. So already, again, that requires incredible critical thinking. The ability to assess yourself and say, this isn't it, as an advanced teacher, right? If someone is that level, then that requires a lot, right? He already had basically everything that he could need to be contented with his life. He had it, but he stepped down. Then he achieved an even higher state of meditation, which is literally the highest possible state of meditation anyone can achieve without being enlightened, basically, of conscious meditation. Even more advanced than the teacher at the time, because Uddaka Ramaputra, his second teacher, hadn't actually realized it. Only his father had, or his teacher. So the Buddha was even more advanced than his second teacher. And he also left that behind after becoming a teacher, and then so on. So I won't go through the whole life of the Buddha, but if you look at his life, he wasn't blindly following the culture of his time, right? He actually questioned his upbringing, his accomplishments, his teachers, his philosophical systems and traditions several times in a row. And he kept going, right? And so the Buddha was able to think this through. So this is what the Buddha defines as wrong view. There are a couple points I want to emphasize here. One, of course, is that basically what is wrong view here? The Buddha is saying that it's the view that it's the flat denial that there is no afterlife and there's no karma with efficacy over lifetimes. That's basically the point. That's the main message of the wrong view here. And then the other factor, which I think is very important, which is often not mentioned, is part of wrong view is that there is no ascetic or Brahmin who is rightly comported and rightly practiced, who describes the afterlife after realizing it with their own insight. Right? So right view in this context and wrong view in this context, it's not just like the blind belief in an afterlife. It includes the view or the denial that people actually realize the afterlife with insight and practice. Right? So I would be willing to bet that most of us have never seen an actual light wave or photon, right? With like the actual, of course we've seen light, but have we actually seen the particles and the behavior of the particles, right? Because physicists tell us that photons or light is actually both a wave and a particle at the same time, depending on how you measure it and so on, which is basically that was just totally beyond what people thought was possible until very, very recently. I bet that none of us have ever seen that. Or I bet that none of us have don't even have the ability to comprehend the details of what that means. But I bet that most of us would believe it. Why do we believe it? Because we believe that there are scientists who are rightly comported and rightly practiced who describe it after realizing it with their own insight. Right? That's why. So if we deny that, if we say, no, I don't believe that there are scientists who have discovered that the earth is round, I believe that it's flat, then we're not just denying that the earth is round, but we're also denying that there are people more advanced than us who have actually realized something using the proper instruments and tools and practices and technology, right? So it's more than just it's not just the blind belief in the afterlife. The view here is that there is actually a way to realize the afterlife with the proper practice, technology, and conditions. And that people can actually do that. And they teach it after realizing it, not just because their teacher said it, not because it's in a holy book, not because they've worked it out with reason, but because they've actually realized it with the proper technology, right? So I don't think that that's emphasized enough, because that's actually what the Buddha is saying here, right? It's the view that there are actually people who can do that. So wrong view is the flat denial of all that, right? And at least in this context, right? And so why is that wrong? Well, of course, as we mentioned, if you think that it's not possible to realize the afterlife, it's not possible that there is an afterlife, there is no such thing as karma over lifetimes, then you will not embark on the Noble Eightfold Path. Because what is the Noble Eightfold Path for? It's for achieving Nibbana. So what is Nibbana? Well, one definitely crucial factor, one crucial definition of it would be the ending of rebirth. So if you don't believe in rebirth, it'd be like the path to the end of Santa Claus. There's no point in following that path. The path to Santa's workshop. You're not going to walk down that road because you don't think that there is Santa's workshop. Like, you're not going to be getting anywhere. So if you don't actually believe in karma and in an afterlife, and you don't believe that there's such a thing as practicing to realize that, you won't develop the path to do that, because that's what the Noble Eightfold Path does. Of course, it goes beyond just realizing, someone who you don't necessarily, I should say, it's not that the Noble Eightfold Path only leads someone who follows it to realize that there's an afterlife. It goes even further than that, right? But that's part of it. So if you don't think that that's a possibility at all, then there's no point in developing it. If you don't think that there is such a thing as past and future lives, there's no point in ending them, because they don't exist, right? There's no point in developing good karma because it doesn't exist. So I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but this would be the wrong view, right? So this is why the Buddha is saying right view comes first, because at the very least, if you're going to try to end rebirth, you have to believe in it. If you're going to try to realize that, you have to believe it's possible to realize it. And you also have to believe it's possible that there have been people in the past who realized it. Namely, for example, the Buddha, right? Everyone else who followed the Noble Eightfold Path. So this is why the right view it has to come first. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. So you definitely can't develop right samadhi, because right samadhi is samadhi which leads to the end of rebirth. Doesn't exist if you don't believe that there is no such thing as rebirth. So you definitely won't develop that. So right view is your view to distinguish what is wrong and what is right. What leads to Nibbana, what doesn't. And I think it would be pretty clear to you, right, how this wouldn't, if you held this view, how it wouldn't lead you to develop the Eightfold Path. I think that should be relatively clear. So right view is when you apply that perspective and you discern what is the view that will help you. Okay, so that's wrong view. And then the Buddha says, and what is right view? Right view is twofold. He says, there is right view that is accompanied by defilements, partakes of good deeds, and ripens in attachments. And there is right view that is noble, undefiled, transcendent, a factor of the path. So the Buddha is here making a distinction between two types of right view. One, he says, is accompanied by defilements and ripens in attachments. And one, he says, is noble and is a factor of the path. What is the right view that is accompanied by defilements, partakes of good deeds, and ripens in attachments? It's the view that there is meaning in giving, sacrifice, and offerings. There are fruits and results of good and bad deeds. There is an afterlife. There are such things as mother and father, and beings that are reborn spontaneously. And there are ascetics and Brahmins who are rightly comported and rightly practiced, and who describe the afterlife after realizing it with their own insight. So that is right view that is accompanied by defilements, partakes of good deeds, and ripens in attachments. So this is what the Buddha is saying here, is that this view, the view that in an afterlife, that view alone, when he says it partakes of good deeds, he means that it leads to merit. It's part of merit. So if you believe that there is meaning in giving, sacrifice, and offerings, meaning that you believe it's good to give, and you believe in karma, you believe in an afterlife, and so on, then you will develop merit, right? So just imagine for a moment that you realized and knew for yourself, as plainly as you know that today exists, as plainly as you know that yesterday exists, as plainly as you believe in tomorrow. Imagine that you believed so viscerally, so fully, that rebirth was real and karma was real. So you would think twice about doing bad things, right? Because you'd think, well, that really does have consequences. You would think twice about, denying such things, because if you see it, then why would you deny it? And you would think twice about denying that other people know it, right? So the view of rebirth, if you really truly have that view, that would really truly affect your actions and your thoughts, right? So this is where right view, again, it comes first. So like if someone really, really believes in that, it really, really will affect how they act. Your view affects your behavior. So if you believe that there's a bridge and that you really can walk across that bridge to get to a safe shore, you're going to walk across it. If you believe that the bridge doesn't exist or that the bridge is going to collapse, you won't walk across it. So if you really believe that this is real, you can develop good karma, you can go to a good place and so on, then you will do that, right? You actually will do that because you really believe it. So right view, it affects your thoughts and your deeds and your actions. And that's why it's important. But the Buddha says that right view alone, the view in the afterlife, it is accompanied by defilements. Doesn't mean that it's wrong, because he's already defined wrong view is actually the denial of an afterlife. So it's important not to confuse this. He's not saying that this view is wrong, but he's saying that this view in and of itself, it actually isn't liberating, right? Many people believe in an afterlife. Many people believe in the efficacy of deeds. That doesn't get them on the Noble Eightfold Path. It just gets them on the path to making merit. It just gets them on the path to a good rebirth. So that's what it means here. I actually wouldn't translate this as ripens in attachments. I don't agree with this translation. I would translate it as it ripens in acquisition. So acquisition meaning it ripens as, for example, acquiring a new body, acquiring new senses, acquiring a good rebirth, acquiring fortune, and so on in your future lives. So if you have the view in an afterlife and in karma, that will not ripen in liberation. It will just ripen in a good rebirth, right? In acquisitions and so on. So it's good, it's right? It is right view. It's important not to think this is wrong view. It's right view, but it's not the noble one. Then he says, and what is right view that is noble, undefiled, transcendent, a factor of the path? So what is the view which will lead you to Nibbana? He says, it's the wisdom, the faculty of wisdom, the power of wisdom, the awakening factor of investigation of principles, and right view as a factor of the path, in one intent on the noble, intent on the undefiled, who possesses the noble path, and develops the noble path. So that is called right view, that is noble, undefiled, transcendent, a factor of the path. So here the Buddha is saying that noble right view, meaning a factor of the path, right? A factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. What is the view which will get you out of samsara? He says it's the wisdom. So it's the faculty of wisdom, the awakening factor of investigation, and so on, which someone who's intent on attaining Nibbana, basically it's the view of someone who is intent on attaining Nibbana. It's the wisdom of someone intent on attaining Nibbana. That wisdom, that view that they have, that is the right view that leads out. So here the Buddha is actually not defining right view in terms of what is the content of the view, but he's defining right view in terms of how right view functions, which is useful, right? Because he's saying right view is the view, it's the wisdom of someone who's intent on realizing Nibbana. It's the view which will lead them to the noble, to the undefiled. It's the wisdom which will lead them out of samsara. So that's actually, it's a definition of right view, which is in terms of its function, in terms of its practical application, not in terms of the content. In other suttas, the Buddha defines right view in the Noble Eightfold Path as the view of the Four Noble Truths, right? So and just think about that for a moment, right? So if you have the view that samsara is suffering, that the cause is craving, that you can end craving, and that you can do that by developing a practice, what are you going to do? Right? So if you have the view that if you put your hand on a hot stove, are you going to do that? If you have the view that it's very painful, I should say, to put your hand on the hot stove, you're going to avoid that, right? Even if you don't touch the stove, you believe it's going to be painful, you won't touch it to the best of your ability. So if your view is that samsara is suffering, as the Buddha says, he takes his fingernail and he picks up some poop. He says, monks, even this much of samsara he doesn't approve of. Even this much is suffering. So would you want to pick up even a little bit? No, you wouldn't, because your view would be that it's suffering, that it's not good, like that's not going to be, you don't want it. And would you develop craving? No, you would avoid craving. You would develop a practice to diminish your craving, right? Because you would know that craving is the cause of suffering. So the problem is that the world is not following that view. The world is following the view that samsara is beautiful, samsara is pleasant. Sight, sound, smells, taste, touch, and thought are wonderful, that we should enjoy ourselves. So in the world, what is freedom? Freedom is the freedom to follow your craving. In the training of the Buddha, what is freedom? It's freedom from craving. So the opposite, the exact opposite. So freedom to be indulging in your craving, or freedom to not have any craving, freedom from craving. So it's the exact opposite. So if you have the view that is of the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha is saying that that is the view which will bring one who is it'll make them intent on the noble, intent on the undefiled, and it will lead them to develop the noble path, essentially. That's the right view, which is noble, which is ennobling. And he says, they make an effort to give up wrong view and embrace right view. That's the right effort. Mindfully, they give up wrong view and take up right view. That's the right mindfulness. So these three things keep running around and circling around right view, namely right view, right effort, and right mindfulness. So this is actually the main part of the sutta that I think is really, really beneficial here, is that here the Buddha is defining how he says these three run and circle around, right? Right view, right effort, and right mindfulness. So what is the path, right? What is the Buddha's path? It's the Noble Eightfold Path. And how does it work? It builds one factor to the next, starting with right view. But there's also this interaction that we should develop, this interaction that the Buddha is saying should take place as you cultivate the path, as you train your mind, condition your mind to align itself with the Four Noble Truths. Then you also are using you're using view, right? So to whatever extent you have the perspective to give up what is wrong and develop what is right, which I'm pretty sure everyone watching the stream, you have some interest, right? Some inclination to develop what's wrong, to develop what's right, and to remove what's wrong, right? So you use whatever perspective you have of what will lead you to Nibbana, what will lead you away from Nibbana, using the instructions that you've received from the Buddha and so on. And you make an effort to give up what's wrong and embrace what's right. That's your right effort. So right effort, the Buddha is saying, is guided by right view. Right view is telling right effort what to do. So it's like if you're training a dog, right? So you have the person who is training the dog sit or roll over or stand or whatever. So the trainer knows, they have the view, they have the instructions of what to do. And then they're teaching that so that the dog makes an effort, right? So right view is informing your effort. So you know what should you do and what should you not do. What should you cultivate and what should you not cultivate. That's where you try to apply your view, your perspective from the teachings of the Buddha to inform your effort. And then he says that mindfully, they give up wrong view and take up right view. That's the right mindfulness. So right mindfulness is that which is watching, which is observing the process, and which is keeping track of the process, right? So you have to be mindful of what is wrong and what is right, and you're mindful of your effort. So as you apply your effort, you're mindfully observing that. You're mindfully keeping track of that progress, mindfully keeping track of that process, and you're remembering the instructions, bearing them in mind, right? So you remember what is right, you remember what is wrong, you remember to apply effort for what is right, you remember to apply effort to give up what is wrong. And so your view informs your effort, and your effort is kind of feeding and being guarded by your mindfulness. And those three things should be circling around one another so that you keep developing. It's like kind of spiraling upwards, right? As your right view informs your effort, you become more pure, which empowers your mindfulness. So the process is being observed with more clarity and so on, kind of circling around. But it all has to start with right view. Because if you have wrong view, you'll apply wrong effort. And if you have wrong effort, then your mindfulness will be wrong because you'll be observing and remembering, guarding over the process wrongly, right? You'll be looking at it the wrong way. So again, for example, if you think that there's no afterlife, then you apply effort. You think that sensuality is to be found. You think that happiness is to be found by just enjoying the pleasures of this life. So then you apply effort to enjoy the pleasures of this life. And you might be mindful, observing that process. Like, what is more pleasant? Is it this chocolate or that chocolate? Is it this craft beer or that one? Is it this restaurant or that restaurant? Is it this relationship or that relationship? So you'll be observing. You might be very mindful of, like, if you're really intent on being happy, right? You might be very mindful, like very observant, keeping in mind your goal and watching and observing and learning from the process. But if your view is wrong, then your effort and your mindfulness are going to be wrong. And so the whole thing will be wrong. And it will be like a feedback loop, right? So on the other hand, if you get even just a little bit of the right perspective, if you apply your effort to embrace the right and put away what's wrong, to embrace what leads to peace and put away what leads to suffering, then your effort will be good. And then your mindfulness, observing that process, watching over the process, protecting the process, your mindfulness will also be right. So right view leads these other three, effort and mindfulness, to circle around and spiral upwards instead of spiral downwards. And so, like, that's the Buddhist path of meditation, right? The Buddhist path of meditation is, you need to, in the present moment, you try to apply the lens of the Four Noble Truths. So let's say you're meditating and you experience a painful bodily sensation. If you have the wrong view about the pain, you'll apply wrong effort. Like, you'll try to move your body around, for example, and you'll be mindful, you'll be watching over the pain. Oh, when is the pain going to go away? So it's all going to go wrong. If you have the right view, that a little bit of pain, a healthy sense of pain, so something that is not going to disturb your body, but just a normal pain, which is natural to arise in the body. If you have the view that, oh, it's normal for pain to arise in the body, and actually you use that to feed your wisdom, you'll apply effort to remove your craving for the pain. And then your mindfulness will become more powerful, because your mindfulness will focus and hone in on removing craving and observing the nature of the body. And as you do that, then your view will be fed with more data. So as you apply that, maybe you do give up some craving and you find more peace. Then your mindfulness will pass that information over to your view, and then you'll be more enforced to apply more energy to your practice. So you'll get more enthusiasm. You'll get more ability to develop the Eightfold Path. So if you apply right view, the view of the Four Noble Truths, and so on, then your effort will enforce your mindfulness will enforce your view, and they'll circle around and spiral upwards like that. So right view, if you just have right view, basically everything else follows. You don't need to be told really to do anything else, because you'll know exactly what to do. Like, you sit down to meditate and you're like, what do you need to do? Well, you need to develop the Noble Eightfold Path. So your view will inform that, and then you'll apply effort to do that, and your mindfulness will watch over that process. So everything will just circle around those three factors. And those three factors will lead you to develop all the other factors, all the way up to right samadhi, until you develop right unification of mind. And because it's guided by right view, once you attain right samadhi, you'll have fulfilled the Eightfold Path, and then you can gain insight right into it. So right view, right effort, and right mindfulness are the ones that are circling, spiraling around each other, whirling and spinning upwards, so that you develop the rest of the path, all the way up to the right samadhi. Okay, then the Buddha continues. He says, in this context, right view comes first. And how does right view come first? When you understand wrong thought as wrong thought, and right thought as right thought, that's your right view. And what is wrong thought? Thoughts of sensuality, of malice, and of cruelty. This is wrong thought. And what is right thought? Right thought is twofold. He says, there is right thought that is accompanied by defilements, partakes of merit, and ripens in acquisition. And there is right thought that is noble, undefiled, transcendent, a factor of the path. So again, just going back here. So what did the Buddha say? He says that right view, it comes first again, because right view will decide what is right thought and what is wrong thought. So that's already your instruction. Right? So when you're meditating, when you're going about your day, you need to inform your right view. If you have the right view that, for example, thoughts of sensuality are wrong, then whenever those come up, your view will go beep, 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 wrong. What will happen? You'll apply right effort to remove the wrong thoughts, and you'll be mindful of that process, observing your mind with the effort. So see how those three factors already, I'm spoiling it for you, but that's what he's going to say, right? It's all going to spin around those three. So, as I mentioned, the Buddha actually did this practice. When the Buddha he explained what did he do when he was trying to attain Nibbana, when he was not yet awakened. He said he divided his thoughts into two categories, and he cultivated those which were leading him onwards, and he removed those which were not leading him onwards. So he actually did that, right? He applied right view. He wasn't enlightened or anything, but he applied his limited sense of right view, and that he applied it to his thoughts, so that he developed a right effort, a right mindfulness, purified that, and through those three factors, he purified his thoughts. So you see how, like, although the path is linear, it starts with right view and then it goes to right thought, but there's also this other aspect of like right view, right effort, and right mindfulness whizzing and whirling, spiraling around each other to purify each of those factors. So what are the twofold right thoughts, which we've just mentioned? He says, thoughts of renunciation, thoughts of goodwill, and thoughts of harmlessness. That is right thought that is accompanied by defilements. Again, this is right thought. So it's not wrong thought. He's already defined wrong thought. So wrong thought is when your mind is inclining towards sensuality, inclining towards aversion, and inclining towards harming. So that's wrong thought. So then when we go into the two types of right thought, it's important to not think that the one he calls defiled, that doesn't mean you shouldn't cultivate it. But it's not a factor of the path, he's saying, because in and of itself, thoughts of renunciation, goodwill, and harmlessness don't necessarily lead to Nibbana. Other places, the Buddha actually defines this as right thought in the Noble Eightfold Path. So let's compare it. So what does he say then? He says, what is right thought that is noble, undefiled, transcendent, a factor of the path? He says, it's the thinking, the placing of the mind, thought, planting, implanting, embedding of the mind, verbal process, in one intent on the noble, intent on the undefiled, who possesses the noble path and develops the noble path. So here he's saying it's any thought which is intent on Nibbana, basically. So again, here the Buddha is kind of saying that there's a normal right thought, which is still right, but in of itself actually doesn't lead out of samsara. And then there's the thought which is noble, basically informed by the noble right view, right? Which he's saying that thought will be intent on attaining Nibbana. So as we work through the sutta, which we won't be able to finish, but as we work through it, then it'll become more clear from the Buddha's explanations that when he divides the path into mundane and super mundane, or mundane and transcendent, the transcendent factors are like the moment when all the path factors come together and the path kind of converges for someone to realize the path, basically. So here he's kind of dividing it into the sides of the path which one develops up to the point when the path converges. And then when it converges, that is the path which will lead them to arahantship. So there's kind of like two levels of the path, right? When one is first getting started, and then once you develop the Noble Eightfold Path to a certain degree and the factors come together, then you have to continue developing it, right, to attain enlightenment, full enlightenment. So once you start out just hearing the teachings of the Buddha, not really understanding much, and then as you develop your right view and you apply right effort and right mindfulness to purify your thoughts, your speech, and everything else up to right samadhi, then eventually you might attain noble right view, perfect right view, right? You might attain a view which will lead you guaranteed to enlightenment, to arahantship. And from that point onward, then you have to continue developing the path. But from then onward, the path factors that you possess will be in and of themselves basically ennobling, right? As you develop them and perfect them. So if that doesn't make any sense, I apologize, but I'm going to continue because I think that the more practical aspects of the sutta continue on. They make an effort to give up wrong thought and embrace right thought. That's the right effort. Mindfully, they give up wrong thought and take up right thought. That's the right mindfulness. So these three things keep running and circling around right thought. namely right view, right effort, and right mindfulness. So again, as you develop the second step of the path, you have to apply your perspective on what's right and wrong, distinguishing what would be beneficial and what's not beneficial. That informs your effort. Your effort is overseen and protected and guarded by your mindfulness, which purifies the mind, and you are on your way towards right samadhi. Then he continues, in this context, right view comes first. And how does right view come first? When you understand wrong speech as wrong speech and right speech as right speech, that's your right view. So now he's talking about how you use right view to develop right speech, right? And what is wrong speech? Speech which is false, divisive, harsh, or nonsensical. This is wrong speech. So if you have the view, again, that you start to develop your sila, right? And you start to see that telling intentional lies, intentionally dividing people against one another, speaking in harsh, cruel ways, like insulting and abusing people with your speech, and nonsensical, idle chatter, like talking about, random celebrities and gossiping about something which is totally irrelevant, which is not practical or useful, especially not practical to developing your spiritual practice. You'll see that actually just leads your mind away from Nibbana, right? So if you have that view, you will apply effort not to speak that way. And then he says, in what is right speech? Right speech is twofold. Again, he's saying it's twofold. There is right speech which is accompanied by defilements, partakes of merit, and ripens in acquisitions. And there is right speech that is noble, undefiled, transcendent, a factor of the path. In what is right speech that is accompanied by defilements, partakes of merit, and ripens in acquisitions? The refraining from lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, and talking nonsense. That is right speech that is accompanied by defilements. And what is right speech that is noble, undefiled, transcendent, a factor of the path? It's the desisting, abstaining, abstinence, and refraining from the four kinds of bad verbal conduct in one intent on the noble, intent on the undefiled, who possesses the noble path and develops the noble path. This is right speech that is noble. So again, just to go over this one more time, what do I take this to mean? The way I take this to mean is that when the path actually converges and issues in someone attaining enlightenment, they won't actually be speaking, right? They won't actually be speaking at all, because basically they'll be attaining. This is one way of looking at it, is that when someone actually attains noble right samadhi, at that point, the whole path is in place, right? But when someone attains right samadhi, they're not speaking. You can't be speaking if you're in samadhi. So what the Buddha is defining also with right thought, right? Before he said the noble right thought is like the placing of the mind, which is noble and so on. So again, like when you're actually, if you attain samadhi, noble right samadhi, you actually won't really be thinking, right? But your right thought will be purified because your mind will be directed towards Nibbana. So the noble, what he's calling the noble factors of the path, are what are the path factors like when someone has the entire noble path in one, like basically when they finish the path. At that moment, when the whole path is present. Right, so most of the time we're kind of, you could say, we don't have the whole path, right? If we did, we would attain enlightenment. That's the whole point of the Noble Eightfold Path. So if it was present right now, you would be attaining enlightenment right now. So if you're not attaining enlightenment right in this moment, then you don't have all the path factors aligned right at once, because namely, you would have to develop noble right samadhi, which is how he started this whole thing. And you wouldn't be able to be listening to this because you'd be in meditation. So the noble path factors are those path factors which have been previously aligned and put in place, and then with those as the prerequisite, as the Buddha said, when you attain right samadhi, meaning you attain samadhi, intent on nibbana, with all the previous factors in place, at that time, this is what your right speech is. It's simply the desisting from wrong speech. It's simply the fact that you're not saying anything wrong. Your speech has been purified already. Okay. So they make an effort to give up wrong speech and embrace right speech. That's the right effort. Mindfully, they give up wrong speech, and mindfully, they take up right speech. That's the right mindfulness. So those three things keep running and circling around right speech, namely right view, right effort, and right mindfulness. So even before you attain right samadhi, you have to purify your right speech, right? So the purification of right speech, which happens with your right view, your effort, and your mindfulness, that will lead you to eventually attain right samadhi. And once you attain that, then your speech will be called noble, a factor of the path. So like the Buddha is he's giving both sides here. He's giving the side of developing the factors, and then he's giving the definition of the factors when they're totally in alignment and all lined up to issue in enlightenment. And then he continues, in this context, right view comes first. And how does right view come first? When you understand wrong action as wrong action, and when you understand right action as right action, that is your right view. So again, what is right view? It's actually the practical ability to distinguish between what is wrong and what is right, and what should be cultivated, what should not be cultivated, right? What is wholesome, what is unwholesome, what is skillful, what is unskillful. So if you can do that much, then already you're developing right view, right? So if you've heard what is wrong speech and what is right speech, and you're already developing yourself to see why is it wrong, why is it right, you're already developing your right view, and you're working your way towards developing the noble path. So although you might not have the noble path there yet, you're going to be developing it because you're using your right view as a guide to lead you towards that point. So like this is kind of defining, this is the Buddha's explanation of how you start out from the beginning, and then you use that to get all the path factors aligned. And then when they align, if your view is right, then it'll be the right path, and at that point it'll turn into the noble path. So it's kind of like at first it's mundane, but eventually once it all aligns, if everything is in place, it'll transform into the noble path, and that would be like you'll be on the plane, and then you're off to noble land. So even just so it's not supposed to, so the right view in this context of right view, which discerns wrong action as wrong action and right action as right action, that's, you don't have to be waiting. This is immediately you should be developing that, right? So this is a prescription, not a description. And what is wrong action? Wrong action is killing living creatures, stealing, and sexual misconduct. And what is right action? Right action is twofold, of course, as he's mentioned. So there's right action, which is accompanied by defilements, partakes of merit, and ripens in acquisitions. And there's right action that is noble, undefiled, transcendent, a factor of the path. What is right action that is accompanied by defilements, partakes of merit, and ripens in acquisitions? So the right action before you've attained the whole Noble Eightfold Path, what is the one that you're developing in order to eventually get to that point? Refraining from killing living creatures, refraining from stealing, and refraining from sexual misconduct. And what is right action that is noble, undefiled, transcendent, a factor of the path? It's the desisting, abstaining, abstinence, and refraining from the three kinds of bad bodily conduct in one intent on the noble, intent on the undefiled, who possesses the noble path and develops the noble path. That is right action, which is noble. So again, once you've developed all the path factors, and you've already developed right action, and your view is set, and then you attain samadhi, and you develop the samadhi, which is intent on nibbana, at that point, you won't actually be acting, but the abstinence from all the bad things, that counts as your right action at that time. They make an effort to give up wrong action and embrace right action. That's their right effort. Mindfully, they give up wrong action, and mindfully, they take up right action. That's their right mindfulness. So those three things keep running and circling around right action, namely right view, right effort, and right mindfulness. So again, here, right mindfulness, even before you get to it, the seventh factor, right mindfulness, already plays a role. Similarly, right effort, right? So here, mindfulness is basically the mindfulness of wrong and right in terms of the Noble Eightfold Path. It's your awareness of that process and your overseeing of that process. And you're maintaining that as your theme of meditation. So again, as you're meditating, whether standing, walking, sitting, or lying down, mindfulness is supposed to be supervising that. But before you get to the point of even like the seventh factor, mindfulness already has to play the role of supervising your application of effort in order to purify the wrong thoughts, the wrong speech, the wrong actions, the wrong views, and so on. So already your mindfulness, right mindfulness is mindfulness which is overseeing your development of the Noble Eightfold Path, right? And similarly, right effort is your effort, which is the effort to develop the Noble Eightfold Path. So already your mindfulness is coming in, and here you'll notice that mindfulness has that role, that factor, or that function of overseeing the proper development of the path, right? So it's actually mindfulness with a particular purpose in mind. And so if you want to do mindfulness meditation, this is the Buddha's mindfulness meditation. This is the MBSR, mindfulness-based suffering reduction. So if you want to do the Buddha's mindfulness-based suffering reduction or mindfulness-based suffering removal, then you need the mindfulness which discerns and oversees the Noble Eightfold Path, right? So if you want to know which mindfulness method should you develop, this is it. The Buddha is just explaining it right here. Okay, and then again, he says right view comes first. How does it come first? When you understand wrong livelihood as wrong livelihood and right livelihood as right livelihood, that is your right view. Again, so you have to develop the perspective, understanding what livelihood should you cultivate, what should you not cultivate. And then you develop your effort and your mindfulness to purify and oversee that process. That's your meditation. As you're doing that, you're developing the steps of the path to lead you to right samadhi, and then everything will come together and you'll have the Noble Eightfold Path. It'll flip over to be noble, and then you'll attain enlightenment. So what is wrong livelihood? What is the one that you need to have the view that it's wrong? Deceit, flattery, hinting and belittling, and using material things to chase after other material things. So just because this is relevant especially to lay people, right? This definition of wrong livelihood is especially relevant to monastics because things like using deceit, flattery, hinting, belittling, and using material things to get more material things. This also applies to lay people. But for lay people, there's also another explanation of wrong livelihood, which is trade in weapons. So like if you sell guns or if you sell swords or if you sell, if you work for, often it's interpreted, for example, as also like if you work for the military involved in weaponry that the military is using to kill people and so on. And if you are engaged in trade in living creatures, meaning like, you're selling live animals, you are selling slaves, which nowadays is less common, but in the time of the Buddha, it included slavery. So anything involving like trading living beings, the point is that living creatures don't belong to us. They don't belong to us to be sold and bought. They're not property. So that's considered wrong livelihood. Trade in meat, meaning like if you work in a butcher shop or you are selling meat, the point being that you're supporting a business which is actively killing animals. So specifically involved in killing, again. Trade in intoxicants, like if you work as a bartender or you work at a liquor store, again, you're dishing out and you're actively helping people intoxicate themselves. And trade in poison, which again, actively helping the harm and killing of beings, that's wrong livelihood because you're doing something which is supporting something that's wrong, something that's bad. So those are examples of wrong livelihood, but also deceit. So like, for example, if you're trading, you have a business and you tell people you're deceiving them, like you're lying in your job in order to make more sales, that would be wrong livelihood. And then other things. So also he says, for example, using material things to chase after other material things. So especially for monastics, like if monastics are kind of using their requisites to try to get more requisites, like trading, I got this robe, maybe I'll give it to the neighbor and I'll get a nice silk carpet for my hut. Like that's not really right livelihood. You shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be acquiring things with other things you've gotten. So for lay people, it's especially things like deceit and belittling and flattery, hinting, and the wrong livelihoods that I've just listed before. So you try to use your right view to understand that's wrong. And then there's the two types of right livelihood, that which is the normal one and the one that's noble. He says the normal one is when a noble disciple gives up wrong livelihood and earns a living by right livelihood. So for monastics, the Buddha gives a long explanation of that in the gradual training, and for lay people, I've just mentioned how you would give that up. And then the noble right livelihood, which is a factor of the path, is the desisting, abstaining, abstinence, and refraining from wrong livelihood in one intent on the noble, and so on. So again, when you have all the factors of the path lined up together, then you won't actually be working, but your livelihood will have been pure by the fact that you've abstained from the wrong one. They make an effort to give up wrong livelihood and embrace right livelihood. That's the right effort. Mindfully, they give up wrong livelihood and take up right livelihood. That's the right mindfulness. So those three things keep running and circling around right livelihood, namely right view, right effort, and right mindfulness. Okay, so we've just finished that section of the sutta. So what is the Buddha's meditation method? You try to develop right view to discern what is good and what is wrong. You use your effort to develop that and your mindfulness to meditate, oversee that, observe that, guard and protect that. And that is your development. That's how you use right view as the starting point to then develop right thought, right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Right? So at that point, you have right view, right thought, right speech, right action, and right livelihood. All that's left is right effort and right mindfulness and right samadhi. But you've already been developing right effort or right mindfulness. And then what is right samadhi? Is when your mind develops unification with those 7 factors preceding it. So the Buddha has kind of already explained the path at this point, right? He hasn't explained the exact definition of right effort or right mindfulness in and of themselves, but it would be obvious what you would do, right? So now then he continues, in this context, right view comes first. And how does right view come first? Right view gives rise to right thought. Right thought gives rise to right speech. So again, when you have the view of the world, you're going to start thinking about the world in line with that view. Like if you have the view that craving is the cause of suffering, you're going to start thinking more thoughts of renunciation, less thoughts of aversion, less thoughts of harming. If you don't think thoughts of hatred, cruelty, and sensuality, it's very unlikely that you're going to start speaking cruel things, speaking angry things, speaking things about sensuality, because you're not even thinking about those things. When he says right speech gives rise to right action, right? So if your speech is very pure, naturally your actions are probably going to follow suit, because actually speech is harder to purify than your actions, generally speaking. So if your thought and your speech are pure, then probably your bodily actions are naturally going to follow on from that. Right action gives rise to right livelihood, right? Because your right livelihood is basically the context of it's basically how right action fits into the broader context of how you earn a living. So like if you already are following the precept of not killing, naturally then if your livelihood supports killing, you're going to start giving that up. So right action gives rise to right livelihood. And he says right livelihood gives rise to right effort. So remember, the Buddha just explained how you develop those previous 5 factors up to right livelihood. At that point, your entire life is oriented around developing the Eightfold Path. Your thoughts, your view, your thoughts, your speech, your action, and the way you live your life are all about attaining Nibbana, basically. So then that will naturally give rise to right effort, meaning that then from that point on, what do you do with your time? What are you doing? Well, you're using it to develop more application to purify even further whatever is an obstruction. So how do you do that? Well, you use your right view and your right thought, right? So once you've already developed your ethics and so on with your right view, then when you sit down to meditate, it should be obvious. Naturally, it will give rise to right effort, because it'll be obvious to you. Like, oh, that's an obstruction. So you apply effort to purify it, and mindfulness oversees the process. So again, right view, right effort, or right mindfulness will kind of spin around each other once you've purified your ethics and your thought and so on in your view. Right effort gives rise to right mindfulness, right? Because as you're purifying your mind, naturally your mindfulness has to be overseeing that, and your mindfulness will become more focused, more sustained, and more intent upon the goal. Right mindfulness gives rise to right immersion. So then once you've developed right mindfulness, then your mind right mindfulness is your ability of the mind to sustain a particular theme. In this case, you're sustaining the theme of purity and stillness. So naturally that will unify your mind together into one collected whole of letting go, one collected whole of attaining Nibbana, of letting go of sensuality, of letting go of the hindrances. So when you let go of the hindrances, when you let go of sensuality, when you're renouncing the world and purifying your mind, eventually, and your mindfulness is focused and sustained around that theme, then naturally you're going to experience red immersion. And at that point, what have you just done? You've just gotten yourself into big trouble with Mara, because you have just stacked up all the dominoes and then boop, you just flicked it over. So once you've done that, once you've got all the way from right view to right immersion, congratulations. The Buddha says right immersion gives rise to right knowledge gives rise to right freedom. So at that point, everything falls into place, because the Buddha says that once you have right immersion, you don't need to make an intention, may you see things as they truly are, because your mind will be so pure, so clear, so focused, and the data that you get from right samadhi of a completely whole, unified, simple mind, that data will be so easy for you to penetrate through, and you already have developed your mind to be intent on seeing, on attaining Nibbana, that basically automatically you will develop right knowledge. So once you have right immersion, it's just guaranteed. You don't really need to do much work. Right knowledge, and then what happens with right knowledge? Right freedom. Right knowledge is when you understand things as they truly are, and right freedom is when you're then freed from, for example, rebirth and so on. And he says, so the trainee has 8 factors, while the perfected one, the arahant, has 10 factors. So the trainee, meaning someone who's developing the path, they develop those 8 factors, and then once those come together, they issue in the 10 factors, meaning right knowledge and right liberation. Those only apply to an arahant here, because only an arahant has full knowledge, and only an arahant is fully free from, from rebirth, from the defilements, from the cause of suffering, and so on. And so that is actually the end of this part of the sutta, and then the rest, the Buddha kind of well, actually, maybe we might as well just read it, because I'm not going to have time anyway. So then he says, and here too, the eradication of many bad, unskillful qualities. So in that case, of someone who develops they become an arahant. The eradication of many bad, unskillful qualities is fully developed due to right knowledge. And he says in this context, so in that context, right view comes first. How does it come first? For one of right view, wrong view is worn away, and the many bad, unskillful qualities that arise because of wrong view are worn away. So when you have right view, you'll wear away wrong view and all the bad qualities that associate with it. Because of right view, many skillful qualities are fully developed. And we've already covered why that would be the case. And then for one of right thought, wrong thought is worn away. For one of right speech, wrong speech is worn away. For one of right action, wrong action is worn away. For one of right livelihood, wrong livelihood is worn away. For one of right effort, wrong effort is worn away. For one of right mindfulness, wrong mindfulness is worn away. For one of right samadhi, wrong samadhi is worn away. For one of right knowledge, wrong knowledge is worn away. For one of right freedom, wrong freedom is worn away. And the many bad, unskillful qualities that arise because of wrong freedom are worn away. And because of right freedom, many skillful qualities are fully developed in them. So, and he says, so there are 20 on the side of the skillful and 20 on the side of the unskillful. That's why it's called the Great 40. And so at this point, I think we can go ahead and close. I hope that was relatively clear and useful to you. I hope it was inspiring to your practice. So we can respect the sutta with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we will not have time tonight to go over some of the questions which were put in the chat. But I hope that if you do have any questions which are really lingering, then please feel free to put those in for monk chat, and we could address those later in the future. So I hope that you all have a wonderful night, and that your practice progresses smoothly, that you all develop the Noble Eightfold Path and experience right knowledge and right liberation. So we'll see you for any future live streams and events at the monastery. May you be well, happy, and peaceful.